Dante wrote, "The path to paradise begins in hell." Join Deacon Don Prendergast and David Fortin as they discuss the tools men need to build the domestic church and the spiritual weapons to defend it. This is Through the Fire.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of Through the Fire. Joining me is my good friend, Deacon Don Prendergast.
Hey.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
Hey, okay, so we should switch roles. Usually I'm the one that talks a whole lot and does the biblical stuff, and you do the intro. So let's just start all over again. Hey, friends, welcome to another episode of Through the... No, I can't do that?
No, you go right ahead.
We already started the show.
We already started the show.
Seriously, I know that you have a profound devotion to divine mercy. I know how much divine mercy impacted your life, brought you closer to Christ, deepened your faith in the Catholic Church. And so I'm really excited, and I'm proud to know you, and I'm proud to call you friend and brother. I'm really excited to hear about how divine mercy really has changed your life. Now, before we get into it, let me just fill in some of the folks that may not be overly familiar with what we're talking about. And so just to give a little bit of background, the whole concept and the story and the devotion, everything that we know about what we call divine mercy came through a nun by the name of Saint Faustina. How do you pronounce her last name? Is it Kowalska?
Actually, it's Kowalska.
Kowalska.
The W is a V in
Right.
Polish.
So Saint Faustina Kowalska, she was a nun, not very old. I think she died, like in her early 20s?
I want to say she was like around 30, I think. She died the year before
30.
World War II started, so... Yeah.
Right, yeah. So Faustina, Saint Faustina, the way the story goes, as she's written it down in her diary, the way the story goes is that she's living in a convent. She was somewhat sickly, and she had numerous encounters with Jesus himself. Jesus himself appeared to her and had numerous conversations with her. And all of the conversations tend to focus towards the necessity for people to just understand how much he wants to forgive. And so the way the story goes is that Sister Faustina, when it was time for her to go to confession along with all the other sisters, she would go into the confessional and she would be confessing to the priest, and she took that opportunity with the priest to start telling stories about all these visions. And it came to be that she would be in the confessional for a couple of hours. And the priest, I'm going to say this very lovingly and very pastorally, but let's just say the priest was starting to get a little annoyed. Not so much her desire to confess and to speak about these visions, the amount of time she was spending there, and who knows, maybe the priest was thinking that, this sister is imagining all this stuff. Anyway, at one point, the priest then advised the sister to just write it down in a notebook. All the things that she encountered, all these prayerful visions that she encountered, just put it in a book. Write it down in a notebook, and you could share the notebook with me, and I'll read it and commentary and whatnot of what we know today is the Diary of Saint Faustina. Here's the interesting part. The story of these visions started to spread. Now, she's from Poland. We know another famous person from Poland, don't we, Dave?
Yes. Somebody very, very special in this story of divine mercy.
Right. Yeah. So John Paul II, he was the Bishop of Krakow, Poland, and he grew up in Poland. He actually was ordained in secret. He was ordained in secret during the Nazi occupation. Anyway, so after St. Faustina died, her messages of mercy started to really take flight. And for quite a while, something like 40 years, the Catholic Church was discerning how much support to put behind this diary. And similar to Medjugorje, I would think, it was very similar to Medjugorje, where, it wasn't only until just recently, like maybe a few months ago or 6 months ago, that the Vatican has finally said, yes, Medjugorje is a legit pilgrimage place with legit things happening by the hand of the Blessed Mother. And so the church, in its discernment, for 40 years, wasn't really getting behind this message from the diary.
And it was predicted that it was going to be rejected for a while.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say predicted. It was told by Jesus himself that it was going to be.
And so what's really wild is that everything, of course, everything that Jesus says, even though we may not want to believe it, it all comes to pass. So going back to John Paul II, he becomes Pope, and the very first person that he canonizes as a saint is Faustina. He canonized her as saint. He gives the apostolic seal of approval for her diary, and from that point forward, it just explodes all over the world. Dave, how did I do? Did I give a good foundation there?
Yeah, that's it. That's our show for today. And
yes, thank you very much, everybody. No, so that's for those that are not really sure what it is. I just kind of touched on the history and the foundation, but please, please, please tell your story of Divine Mercy.
Well, just one thing, Deacon. The Divine Mercy diary, St. Faustina's diary, is actually not the original because she actually got rid of that. I think she burned it, and she had to rewrite it from memory because Father Sapachko, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, required her or asked her to rewrite it because it became that important. Look, I was introduced a gentleman named Mike Cianciello, older gentleman, Knight of Columbus, one of the hardest working guys in our parish to get guys to join the Knights of Columbus, to get guys interested in the Divine Mercy, introduced me. And he simply stood up at a Bible study and said that there was going to be a Lenten mission that included Father Seraphim Mikolenko from the National Shrine of the Divine Mercy in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. It was supposed to be a 3-night thing. Ended up going to those 3 nights. It was a life-changing event. Now remember, my story starts out with the Rosary. The Rosary truly did lead me to the Divine Mercy. It led me to Jesus. So my story is honestly through Mary to Jesus. I fell in love with this message because as somebody who feels like I have a lot of sins to atone for, this message of unfathomable mercy is so comforting to me because none of my sins are bigger than God's mercy. He promises me that this is the last hope for sinners, and I am a sinner. So,
well, Dave, I mean, so many people hear this message, and I think what's important to kind of highlight, we know, both you and I, we know a lot of people that sadly they think they're just done for, they're beyond.
I know.
It's like, this is the way that I am. And I mean, I've actually heard people say, yeah, I know I'm going to hell.
That's
like,
so
wow.
sad. That is
It's
just
incredibly
so sad.
sad.
It's so sad because this really Divine Mercy it's a devotion that is so gospel based, but yet what it is it's a rendering down of the flavor, all the flavors of the Bible, the gospel. It's a rendered down, condensed flavor of the gospel. And it's just delicious once you, I hate to use the cooking analogy, but it's delicious once you realize that God's mercy is there for everyone and for you, So this gentleman stood up, and it had been like 30 years since I'd been to confession. And this guy stood up and said, look, confessions will be available. I went to confession and I just left everything right there in the confessional. And I made my first confession in 30 years to Father Seraphim Mikolenko. And if you don't know who he is a gentleman he's since passed, but he's a priest that was so instrumental in bringing the Divine Mercy to the United States and the world. If you take a look at Father Chris Alara's book, Understanding Divine Mercy, he dedicates this book to Father Seraphim and saying that he is the SM that is actually written about in St. Faustina's diary. That's what the Marian Fathers believe. that he is the SM that is written about in her diary. So I just remember going into confession and saying, Father, I'm sorry, it's been so long. I said, I don't know what to do. And he says, that's okay. You're here now, and that's all that matters.
I mean, that's a great reminder for a lot of people is that, it doesn't matter how long it's been since you went to confession.
No.
It's hard to imagine a priest who, if you go into the confessional and say, Father, I haven't done this in years.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it difficult to even imagine a priest saying, well, nope, I'm not going to hear your confession, and then hand you a bunch of pamphlets to say, no, you've got to relearn the sacrament all over again.
Right.
I find it hard to believe that any priest would do that.
Yeah.
The opposite is also true. Even the Holy Father, Pope Francis, spoke very, very strongly towards the priests of the world, telling priests that when someone comes in to confess whatever sins that they have, to be loving, to be compassionate, to be gentle, and to be merciful, as Jesus calls them to be, the administrators of his mercy in the sacrament of confession.
All the priests that I've spoken to, Deacon, they always say that one of the biggest joys they get is when somebody, it's been 20, 30 years since they've made a confession. They don't care if the person doesn't know the act of contrition. They'll help them.
Right.
The real joy is that they're there and that they are ready to begin the process of reconciliation.
And what's also probably good to point out is, if you're thinking to yourself, whoever might be listening to this, if you're thinking to yourself, oh man, you have no idea. If I go into that confessional, oh man, the priest is going to have difficulty hearing what I have to say. Well, let me just say this. I've been around plenty of priests, plenty of bishops, and they all say the same thing. Pretty much by the end of their first year as a priest, they've heard every confession that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really all that unique. We're not really all that special when it comes to our behaviors. The human person is the human person. We have pretty much standardized weaknesses and sinfulness. I've said this before, Dave, and maybe it's worth mentioning again. For the most part, generally speaking, yeah, the embarrassing stuff for us guys would be sins of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you, pretty much every single priest that is alive today, they've heard every single iteration of various sins of the flesh. So there's nothing you're about to confess that they haven't heard already. And when it comes to women, generally speaking, they've heard all the stories of the gossiping and the telling of tales and, and the lying, about this person. What more? What more? Stealing money from your husband, spending and lying. What could you possibly confess to a priest that hundreds, if not thousands of other penitents that have been in that confessional has already confessed to him? So there is nothing that you can confess that's going to be shocking. Believe me.
And the other thing, too, is that the priest is the representative of a merciful God whose mercy is unfathomable.
Unfathomable. Absolutely.
Yeah. Deacon, there are some things, this book, St. Faustina's Diary, it's a hard book to get through at times because it is very, very mystical in a lot of ways. So,
well, I mean, it's kind of written, tell me if you agree with this, it's kind of written the way somebody would write down their experience of a dream they had.
Right. Very much so.
So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like half literal description and half, I don't want to use the word imagination, but if you can kind of think of it that way, where she's trying to describe something and some of it is concrete and some of it is like Moses in the burning bush.
Right.
Was it actually fire that Moses saw, Or was it the appearance of the Holy Spirit, and the closest that Moses could get to describing it was to say fire?
Right.
So some of what Faustina writes is kind of like that. It's kind of like, okay, we need to rise above the literal and understand the message that she's trying to give us.
And that's why I would suggest, if somebody's interested in getting started reading St. Faustina's diary, there are some other books out there that I would recommend. Unfortunately, one of them, I have the books, but I couldn't find it in my bookshelf. But I would certainly start by reading Father Crisolare's book, Understanding Divine Mercy. And there's another great book. It's one of the best books that I know of about Divine Mercy as far as introduction to Divine Mercy. And it's by a gentleman named Drew Mariani, who also is in radio. He wrote a fantastic book. This book was a giveaway, and it should really honestly be on a bookshelf somewhere. It should be for sale because it's really a great book to get started with. But that's not to take anything away from Father Crisolare's book, Understanding Divine Mercy. I think it would be good to maybe read something like that before you dive into St. Faustina's diary, because, it'll give you a little bit more of a foundation to build upon. Father Mikolenko's sister, his actual biological sister, who was a nun, she actually wrote a book, and it really goes into more of the mystical aspects of St. Faustina's diary. So that is more, I would say, not entry level. It's more of
more advanced,
more advanced to understanding what is really a very simple book, but yet it's a hard book sometimes to understand. It's nice to have the scholarly study of this, but the message of Divine Mercy is it's based in simplicity, and that's why I love this message so much.
Well, and so, okay, we're recording this from two different places in the country. I'm in Florida,
right,
and you're up in the great white north of Canada, right?
Yeah, almost.
Connecticut.
Yeah, the leaves are popping now.
Okay,
so.
That's good. Yeah. Previously I was in New York, as our listeners know. I was ordained at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I had the opportunity to actually serve as a deacon at the National Shrine of Divine Mercy.
Nice.
Which was an incredible experience. One of the things that I would add to the books is, for those people who are interested in digging deeper into Divine Mercy, is you could just simply go to their website. The National Shrine of Divine Mercy. Is it Stockbridge?
It's in Stockbridge, yep.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful.
Yes.
In itself. It's a great place. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to be at.
And for whoever is in the area, for whoever is in the area of the National Shrine, do yourself a favor and go visit. Not only do they highlight St. Faustina, but they also highlight John Paul II at the shrine. And it's a beautiful grounds to walk on. And then so maybe next year, because by the time you hear this message, it's going to be Divine Mercy Sunday. So maybe next year you can plan a pilgrimage to participate in Mass on Divine Mercy Sunday at the National Shrine. That's also a wonderful, wonderful experience to be able to do that. And they usually bring in a bunch of wonderful Catholic speakers to offer all kinds of talks and whatnot, in addition to the celebration of the Mass itself, which, the celebrant for the Mass, I believe it's always the bishop for the diocese. He comes out and celebrates the Mass there. But Dave, what I'm more curious about in regards to your experiences is how you have come to embrace, because we could academically or intellectually, we can talk about any topic. But how have you come to embrace and accept when you make mistakes, when you sin? How have you been able to embrace and accept the reality of Divine Mercy?
Deacon, that's a great question, because we always try to be reconciled to God, And we always try to reconcile to neighbor. But I think the hardest thing for us to really reconcile is ourselves, to forgive ourselves. And I think when we realize the passion that Jesus Christ went through just for us, for me, the pain, the suffering that he went through, because he would do it again if it was even just for me. He would go through it again. So that's always in my mind, that God is love and I need to be love, and I fall short all the time in that. We're given the tools, the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy. And, I think if we can't get out there and do the corporal works, bury the dead, admonish the sinners, if we can't get out there and do that, then we're called to be the spiritual people that perform those, by praying for people and to always pray for that people will become merciful to each other. That's honestly the reason the world is in so much trouble, is because we are not merciful to each other. I've often said World War II did not have to happen if the League of Nations had been merciful to the German people.
Absolutely.
They were seeking justice and not mercy. And I think our Blessed Mother tried to tell us that before World War II happened.
And so you're touching on something that's really important for us to highlight, is the involvement of the Blessed Mother when it comes to divine mercy.
She's the mother of mercy.
She is the mother of mercy, and it really cannot be underestimated. I was just recently, I was giving a homily where I was talking about a story of a priest, and this is talking about mercy. There's a priest by the name of Father Shire, and his story is well known. This guy, he was in a near-death experience in a car accident, and what he recalls from it is he recalls being in front of the judgment seat of Christ. And he freely admitted in the interview that he gave with Mother Angelica how, he was the kind of priest that, was kind of a go along, get along kind of guy, didn't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, never wanted to preach a homily that might offend anybody. He basically he admitted he was very milquetoast, just wanted people to like him. And so he has this near-death experience where he's standing before Jesus, and Jesus basically says to him, "You've been a priest for yourself and never for me." And Jesus tells him that as a result of the choices that he made, that his judgment is that he be condemned to hell. And he knew it. He admitted it. He fully recognized. He said, "Yes, Lord, I know." He would rather talk about in his homilies and in his ministry about, joy and love and peace, never morality, never, anything controversial, abortion, euthanasia, whatever. Wow. And so he knew it. And Jesus says to him, "You are a priest for yourself and never for me." And in this vision, in this experience, this memory, he says, then he heard a woman's voice. And the woman said, "Son, if we give him the graces he needs, perhaps he will bear fruit. Give him another chance." And Jesus replied by saying, "Mother, he's yours." That's some pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, you think?
And of course, he devoted the rest of his life to the Blessed Mother after that. So yeah, that's a whole nother thing, is just how incredible the Blessed Mother is in her love and mercy and desire for goodness. Why else would there be so many apparitions of her all over the world? She's constantly visiting us to warn us, please, 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 change your ways. Pray the rosary. Return to my son. Please. Why else if not for the fact that she's the mother of mercy?
I still think it's amazing that our Lord calls Mary mother.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he still gives her that respect. That's amazing. But, Divine Mercy has truly, it has changed my life. And I am eternally grateful to a man named Mike Cianciello for introducing me to this. So it's amazing what we can do if we just talk about things like this, make it known to people. And Mike is, he's an amazing guy. Like I said before, he's one of the hardest working guys out there that never, does he not have a pamphlet about the Divine Mercy in his pocket that he's willing to give to somebody. Amazing guy, amazing job that he does.
So let me ask you, Dave. I know we only have like a minute or two left,
Yep.
and before we got to take a break, but we know of the Chaplet of Divine Mercy,
Mm-hmm.
and so can you just spend a minute or two just talking about the Chaplet of Divine Mercy?
Well, it's prayed on a rosary, just your regular rosary beads. It's so simple. The chaplet is just a few prayers. Our Father, just some simple prayers that for the sake of his sorrowful passion. And then the response is, have mercy on us and on the whole world. And you can just sit there and meditate on just that. But one thing that I like to do is, because the mantra of Divine Mercy is, Jesus, I trust in you, I like to sit and meditate on all the things that I do trust Jesus in and all the things that I need to trust Jesus in. So when I'm having maybe some, depression starting to creep into my life, that's the thing that I'll try to meditate on is, Jesus, I trust in you. And 99% of the time, it'll draw me back to something that I'm grateful for.
And then, of course, this lifestyle of praying and meditating on Divine Mercy. And I was thinking when we come back after the break, we'll spend some time actually going through the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, because that's how we could then bring the mercy of Christ out into the world and allow it to really bear fruit in other people.
That's all the time we have this week. Tune in next week at this same time for the conclusion of this broadcast.
Don't forget to check out Deacon Don Prendergast on Facebook at Through the Fire. You want to check him out on YouTube, you go to Through the Fire with Deacon Don Prendergast, Rumble at Deacon Don, and you can always check both of us out at www.castingthe.net. Go there and check out the Through the Fire page, and please leave a question that you'd like for us to answer.
Whatever radio station you're hearing this show on, let the radio station know what you think. Send an email and share the program with other people.
So until next week, I'm David Fortin.
And I'm Deacon Don.
God bless.
The preceding program was a Spirit of Truth Radio Arts original program for CastingThe.net.